Hey fly tires, Darren here. Welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tying up a variation of an American pheasant tail nymph, and this one comes from Justin Aldrich, and I found this on Jay Stockard's Fly of the Month. I think this was perhaps in May 2018, but I thought this was a pretty interesting take on the classic. So this is a jig style Euro style kind of nymph, and I'll take you through the steps for this. But the main feature of this that you want to have a look at is that hotspot over top of a bead thorax. So it's pretty straightforward, but rather than giving the hotspot at the tail or behind the bead, I'm putting it on the bead. So don't forget to comment to get entered into the next draw for decals and flies. Let's have a look at the material list and get started. Let's get a fresh hook in the vise. Today we're going to be using a Partridge, this is a Patriot Series barbless hook, and this is the jig hook. It's model number SUJ, and we're going to be tying on a number 12 today. So I've already placed a 3.3 millimeter tungsten bead on here, and we're going to take some 70D rusty brown UTC thread. We're going to start by putting that on right at the eye of the hook, and we're going to take it up around the bend, trim off the tag end, and then we'll wind back to the eye. We want to try and keep this area as sparse as possible. I'm just going to add a half hitch just to keep that in place so it doesn't slip off. You can angle your hook a little bit up just so that makes this part of the tying process a little bit simpler. So we're going to take a little bit of floss here. I've got some Danville hot pink floss, and we're just going to take, it's about a single strand. We're going to tie that in at the eye and then wind it back up just over the elbow of the jig. We'll trim off the back end. We're going to add a whip finish here. And as I said, you want to try and keep the thread wraps to a minimum here, just so that the bead is going to slide over both the bulk of the yarn or the floss and the thread that you've used to attach it here. So you don't need to be too thorough about securing this here. We're going to continue our thread wraps on the other side. So we'll just trim that. We're going to pluck the bead over top. Just push that down, and we'll reattach our thread right behind the bead. And trim off the tag end. So now we're going to pull that floss that we tied into the front. We're going to pull it over top of the bead and secure it down. And we'll just kind of smooth out that tag before we trim it, and you can save the rest of that floss for your next fly. So what we want to do here is add a little bit of durability to this floss, so you can add a little bit of Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails or some super glue, and I've just kind of pushed the fibers together before I lock them in place. What I'm going to be using here is a coating of the bone dry Solaris, and if you wanted to put a couple coats of that on there, it probably wouldn't hurt, but it's just basically to protect the thread from fraying as you're fishing it. And we got that cured. Perfect. And if you wanted to put an extra coat on there, it probably wouldn't hurt too much. So next we're going to take some pheasant tail. Now on the original I believe Justin tied this with Coq de Leon fibers, sort of like a more traditional Euro style jig nymph, but we're going to kind of stick to the American version of the pheasant tail nymph, and we're going to take 6 fibers off of a pheasant tail, tie in the tail about the length of the shank, and then we're going to wrap forward. Now we're going to take a short length of copper wire, and here I'm using UTC small size copper wire for my number 12 jig hook. So we'll just take off a short length of that. And we're going to attach that on our side of the hook, just along the side. And we're going to use close touching wraps just to bind that down right into the tie-in point of the tail. And then we'll fold back those pheasant fibers that we've got tied forward, and then we'll go ahead and kind of smooth out our body. Now we're going to carefully wrap the remainder of the pheasant tail, and I just use my finger just to kind of secure that as it goes around, just because it can unravel really quickly if you're not careful. And the closer you get to the end, the trickier it can get. So you can get just enough length here. If you're tying a smaller fly, you don't have to worry quite so much about the length. And then we'll tie off those fibers right behind the bead. And we'll trim them up. We'll catch those a little later, tie them down just to get them out of the way. Alright, so now we're going to reverse wrap the pheasant tail fibers with our ribbing. So we're just going in the opposite direction that we tied the pheasant tail. And I like to give an extra wrap or two right at the head. And then make sure that when we're tying that down, we wrap both in front and behind of the wire, and then I pull tight up on the wire and give it a few helicopter turns just to wiggle it off. So next we're going to take a piece of Peacock herl, and I like to take mine straight from an eye, so we'll just pluck one off, trim off the butt end just a little bit, and we'll tie that in right behind the bead. And we just want to give that a couple wraps just to give us a small thorax behind our bead. And then we will tie that off with a few wraps of thread placed right in behind the bead. We'll trim off the excess of that herl, and then we're just going to give this fly a whip finish, and then we're ready to put this one in our box and hit the rivers. Alright, I hope you get a chance to try this one out. If you do, make sure you leave a message below. Let me know how you did. Hey fly tiers, thanks for stopping by and checking out my fly tying videos. If you enjoyed the video and want to show your support, hit the thumbs up and share it to your social networks. I hope you consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, be sure to hit the bell icon to get notifications on my latest fly patterns, tips, and reviews. If you have a question or comment, leave a message below. You'll also be entered into the next draw for some of the flies I tie and a few stickers. Until next time, this is Darren saying, keep a hook in your vise. Cheers.